Do you remember when this line from Fiddler on the Roof was still tongue-in-cheek? Tell me, is there a blessing for the Tsar? A blessing for the Tsar, of course. May God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. As a people, we've had some experience with authoritarian rulers, beginning with Pharaoh. Not the one who elevated Joseph to second in command, but the one who ruled in later generations, who was so far removed from the knowledge of Joseph's contributions to Egyptian society that all he knew of the Israelites was that they posed a potential threat to his regime because they were so numerous. That Pharaoh declared, "Let us deal shrewdly with them." Exactly what do you think Pharaoh told the Egyptians about the Israelites in order to encourage them to agree to drown male children in the Nile and to turn against fellow citizens? And as we know, ultimately, the entire Israelite population was enslaved. This 400-year period in the history of our people has sensitized us, b'chol dor vador, in every generation, to the gift, the imperative, the blessing of freedom. We read each Pesach, "B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo, ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim." In each and every generation, each one of us must see ourselves as if we had left Egypt. And we memorialize our liberation daily when we sing Mi Chamocha. Freedom is no small thing. In her book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa begins with this observation: you don't know who you are until you are forced to fight for it. Her story as a CNN journalist covering the Philippines under President Duterte, a democratically elected strongman, holds lessons for all who are grappling with the political climate in which we now find ourselves. To quote Ressa, "The very platforms that deliver the news we need are biased against facts. As early as 2018, studies show that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and farther than facts. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without all three, we have no shared reality. And democracy as we know it," and she adds, "all meaningful endeavors are dead." Facts, truth, trust. Can we have a shared reality amidst anger and hate? George Orwell memorably touched on this, how words create a shared understanding, in his 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language. He wrote the words democracy, socialism, freedom, justice have each of them several different meanings which cannot be reconciled with one another. That is, the person who uses them has his own private definition, but allows his hearer to think he means something quite different. Now, we've all had that experience, using or hearing a word which is understood differently by the listener or the speaker, and so is misunderstood, a miscommunication. But what if the words themselves have lost their meaning? And I'm not speaking of a word like terrific, whose definition was once associated with terror, but has evolved to mean a delightful affirmation. Instead, consider how the word truth has been challenged by those who claim to have alternate facts. Remember when facts used to be objective, immutable, and reliable? Professor Timothy Snyder, author of On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, urges us in Lesson 10 to believe in truth. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom, he wrote. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power because there's no basis on which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. Derived from his scholarship as an historian of 20th century Eastern Europe, Snyder also asserts, post-truth is pre-fascism. And so too the term fake news, which has been defined as information shared to deliberately mislead and cause harm, is another oxymoron. According to the journal Science, fake news overlaps with other information disorders. I find it a relief to know that it is an actual disorder, though I don't think a cure has been found for it yet. When politicians and pundits have repeatedly challenged reports which expose them by claiming that they are fake news, soon after, all news becomes labeled as fake. Co-opting language in this way renders it less shocking and less powerful. But here's the collateral damage. That term loses its power through indiscriminate overuse, and at the same time, it undercuts all legitimate journalistic sources. What follows is that there is no longer a way to describe what was once known as fake news, because the phrase itself has been emptied of meaning. And since we can't identify it any longer, it fades as an object of interest and concern, but the damage has already been done. As the presidential campaign begins in earnest, the same pattern of labeling and co-opting is an intentional part of messaging. And now I ask you to consider the resurgence of the word fascist, which carries a powerful resonance for any who lived through the Nazi era. In an attempt to smear rivals, this label is liberally thrown around as an epithet to sully or undermine the integrity of someone who is entirely and absolutely not a fascist. But by confusing the boundaries and pinning the epithet on others, it also neutralizes any valid criticism because the distinctions between those individuals are harder to discern. Again, a word is empty of its meaning and so of its power. Repetition is a key part of this information disorder. And recently we are hearing the word vermin and phrases like poisoning the blood of America over and over again. And such phrases are more than dangerous. This is the kind of rhetoric that hardens hearts, just as Pharaoh achieved in Egypt, and it turns people against one another. It creates suspicion that some among us are so threatening to the public welfare that they must be eliminated. Half a century ago, when I was learning about the Holocaust in a more academic way, I was introduced to the concept of the big lie, which noted if something is repeated often enough, even if it is not true, repeated exposure will create a resonance. And I was skeptical, assuming that people are smarter than propaganda. And what I failed to factor in was the benefit that I had of distance, knowledge of history, and all that we had come to know and understand in the post-war era. In our own day, seemingly every day, we can see how falsehoods repeated in various forms from multiple sources may become accepted as true. Maria Ressa describes the same tactics in modern terms, explaining, "This is how information operations work everywhere. Lies that are repeated over and over exponentially change the public's perception of an issue. That is something that world powers have always known about propaganda, but it has gained new meaning and pitch in the age of social media." And Hannah Arendt noted trenchantly that people believe lies are true does not make them true. Again, Timothy Snyder warns us. We might be tempted to think that our democratic heritage automatically protects us, but this is a misguided reflex. In fact, the precedent set by founders demands that we examine history to understand the deep sources of tyranny and to consider proper responses to it. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. As we prepare to leave Egypt yet again, let us recall our ancestors' enslavement and its modern equivalent, how the absence of truth enslaves us. When it is compromised, obscured, or distorted, our freedoms are too. History is our great inheritance, which instructs us to ever be vigilant, and truth is a bulwark against tyranny and against oppression. To choose freedom and to keep it is no small thing. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be our portion for good. Shabbat Shalom.